Good morning, Little Masters, and welcome back to today's Tolkien Times. I'm the Man of the West, also from the Prancing Pony podcast. Let's keep Week 18 going with today's Third Age Thursday, a time for us to revisit familiar and sometimes not so familiar stories of the Third Age. Now, today we're going to go back to the Appendices, Appendix A3 to be precise, and we're going to keep reading about Durin's folk. Years afterwards, Thrór, now old, poor, and desperate, gave to his son Thrain the one great treasure he still possessed, the last of the 7 rings, and then he went away with one old companion only, called Náin. Of the ring, he said to Thrain at their parting, "This may prove the foundation of a new fortune for you yet, though that seems unlikely. But it needs gold to breed gold." "Surely you do not think of returning to Erebor," said Thrain. "Not at my age," said Thrór. "Our vengeance on Smaug I bequeath to you and your sons. But I am tired of poverty and the scorn of men. I go to see what I can find." He did not say where. He was a little crazed, perhaps, with age and misfortune, and long brooding on the splendor of Moria in his forefathers' days. Or the ring, it may be, was turning to evil now that its master was awake, driving him to folly and destruction. From Dunland, where he was then dwelling, he went north with Náin, and they crossed the Redhorn Pass and came down into Azanul-Bazar. When Thrór came to Moria, the gate was open. Náin begged him to beware, but he took no heed of him and walked proudly in as an heir that returns. But he did not come back. Náin stayed nearby for many days in hiding. One day he heard a loud shout and the blare of a horn, and a body was flung out on the steps. Fearing that it was Thrór, he began to creep near, but there came a voice from within the gate. "Come on, beardling, we can see you, but there is no need to be afraid today. We need you as a messenger." Then Náin came up and found that it was indeed the body of Thrór, but the head was severed and lay face downwards. As he knelt there, he heard orc laughter in the shadows, and the voice said, "If beggars will not wait at the door, but sneak in to try thieving, that is what we do to them. If any of your people poke their foul beards in here again, they will fare the same. Go and tell them so. But if his family wish to know who is now king here, the name is written on his face. I wrote it. I killed him. I am the master." Then Náin turned the head and saw, branded on the brow in dwarf runes so that he could read it, the name Azog. That name was branded in his heart and in the hearts of all the dwarves afterwards. Náin stooped to take the head, but the voice of Azog said, "Drop it, be off. Here's your fee, beggar beard." A small bag struck him. It held a few coins of little worth. Weeping, Náin fled down the Silverlode, but he looked back once and saw that orcs had come from the gate and were hacking up the body and flinging the pieces to the black crows. Such was the tale that Náin brought back to Thrain, and when he had wept and torn his beard, he fell silent. 7 days he sat and said no word. Then he stood up and said, "This cannot be borne." That was the beginning of the war of the dwarves and the orcs, which was long and deadly, and fought for the most part in deep places beneath the earth. Thrain at once sent messengers bearing the tale, north, east, and west, but it was 3 years before the dwarves had mustered their strength. Durin's folk gathered all their host, and they were joined by great forces sent from the houses of other fathers, for this dishonor to the heir of the eldest of their race filled them with wrath. When all was ready, they assailed and sacked one by one all the strongholds of the orcs that they could find, from Gundabad to the Gladden. Both sides were pitiless, and there was death and cruel deeds by dark and by light. But the dwarves had the victory through their strength and their matchless weapons and the fire of their anger as they hunted for Azog in every den under mountain. At last, all the orcs that fled before them were gathered in Moria, and the dwarf host in pursuit came to Azanul-Bazar. That was a great vale that lay between the arms of the mountains about the lake of Cheled Zaram, and had been of old part of the kingdom of Chazad-dûm. When the dwarves saw the gate of their ancient mansions upon the hillside, they sent up a great shout like thunder in the valley. But a great host of foes was arrayed on the slopes above them, and out of the gates poured a multitude of orcs that had been held back by Azog for the last need. At first, fortune was against the dwarves, for it was a dark day of winter without sun, and the orcs did not waver, and they outnumbered their enemies and had the higher ground. So began the battle of Azanulbazar, or Nanduhirion in the Elvish tongue, at the memory of which the orcs still shudder and the dwarves weep. The first assault of the vanguard, led by Thrór, was thrown back with loss, and Thrór was driven into a wood of great trees that then still grew not far from Cheled Zaram. There Frerin his son fell, and Fundin his kinsman, and many others, and both Thrór and Thorin were wounded. Elsewhere the battle swayed to and fro with great slaughter, until at last the people of the Iron Hills turned the day. Coming late and fresh to the field, the mailed warriors of Náin, Gror's son, drove through the orcs to the very threshold of Moria, crying, "Azog! Azog!" as they hewed down with their mattocks all who stood in their way. Then Náin stood before the gate and cried with a great voice, "Azog, if you are in, come out, or is the play in the valley too rough?" Thereupon Azog came forth, and he was a great orc with a huge iron-clad head, and yet agile and strong. With him came many like him, the fighters of his guard, and as they engaged Náin's company, he turned to Náin and said, "What? Yet another beggar at my doors? Must I brand you too?" With that he rushed at Náin, and they fought. But Náin was half blind with rage, and also very weary with battle, whereas Azog was fresh and fell and full of guile. Soon Náin made a great stroke with all his strength that remained, but Azog darted aside and kicked Náin's leg, so that the mattock splintered on the stone where he had stood, but Náin stumbled forward. Then Azog, with a swift swing, hewed his neck. His mail collar withstood the edge, but so heavy was the blow that Náin's neck was broken, and he fell. Then Azog laughed, and he lifted up his head to let forth a great yell of triumph, but the cry died in his throat. For he saw that all his host in the valley was in a rout, and the dwarves went this way and that, slaying as they would, and those that could escape from them were flying south, shrieking as they ran. And hard by, all the soldiers of his guard lay dead. He turned and fled back towards the gate. Up the steps after him leaped a dwarf with a red axe. It was Dáin Ironfoot, Náin's son. Right before the doors he caught Azog, and there he slew him and hewed off his head. That was held a great feat, for Dáin was then only a stripling in the reckoning of the dwarves. But long life and many battles lay before him, until old but unbowed he fell at last in the War of the Ring. Yet hardy and full of wrath as he was, it is said that when he came down from the gate, he looked gray in the face, as one who has felt great fear. Old age, madness, or the power of the ring, something leads Thrór to try to return to Moria against all wisdom, leading to his death. Azog's arrogance leads to a war of vengeance. Dáin Ironfoot becomes a hero, but at what cost? Join me next week as we see the aftermath of this war. For now, though, that wraps it up for this week's Third Age Thursday. Come back next week as we dive deeper into Dwarven drama. Please visit patreon.com/TolkienTimes to learn how you can support the show, get an ad-free feed, a monthly hangout with me, a bonus weekly episode, and a whole lot more. Please join me again tomorrow on today's Tolkien Times as I welcome another special guest for Fandom Friday. If you're watching this on YouTube, please be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Please follow or subscribe on your podcast apps, and follow @Tolkien Times on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Finally, as Faramir says, go with the goodwill of all good men.